In 1840, the first steam-powered transatlantic mail run is done. The Maria Massacre occurs. William Henry Harrison wins the United States presidential election. The steamship Lexington burns and sinks off the coast of Long Island. The first ever photo of Niagara Falls is taken. New Zealand becomes a British colony. The brig Hannah is registered at Mayport, England. Crazy Horse of the Lakota is likely born. The Solomon Islands experience a devastating volcanic eruption. And one of the deadliest and most overlooked tornadoes in the United States' history struck. Over 150 years later, it still remains one of the deadliest to ever strike this country. This is the story. Long before the tri-state tornado of 1925, and time itself would purge it from common knowledge, this was the U.S.'s legendary behemoth, sometimes called the Great Tornado of almost mythic proportions. As the sun rose over the horizon on the morning of May 7th, 1840, a Thursday, the Natchez planters knew that work across the Mississippi might involve limited, if any, planting in their Concordia parish fields. That line is from an article covering the tornado, and it paints a very mood-setting opening to this story. American frontier, big plantations from the pre-Civil War era, all on the cusp of destruction. The sky was overcast, with a sort of dusty haze and thick clouds, and the sky from 9 to 1 was a continuous rumble of 100 low thunders all melting into each other, was how one witness from the time put it. Gives me the same vibes as, like, the opening of The Road with the line about a series of low concussions. Imagine a movie that opened with narration reading these lines about this tornado or maybe a just as devastating fictional one. It could be very hooking. Like I've said before, Twister prequel. Let's make it happen. In 1840, there was no NOAA. There was no National Weather Service. The more in tune might have been able to pick up on a feeling in the air, or an ache in the bones, or a change in the wind, or a smell of rain, and that might have been all the warning a storm was brewing that they had. Because on May 7th, 1840, a storm was indeed brewing in its depths, and it would spin up the second deadliest tornado in the entire history of the United States. It is noon on May 7th, and the hour grows nigh. No one knew what was coming. The morning had passed routinely for the towns of Natchez and Vidalia. Noon passed and turned to 1, and then a powerful thunderstorm hit. Lovely and cheerful, as a newspaper put it, Natchez was suddenly caught in a torrential downpour. It was the middle of the day, but it got so dark out, reportedly, people had to light the candles in their homes just so they could see. Night had fallen at noon, and 20 miles southwest of Natchez, a massive, powerful, probably wedge tornado, likely rain-wrapped, dropped to the ground. I imagine a powerful wedge like Joplin's tornado scouring across the ground, one that apparently caused such apocalyptic ruins that it left some people with full-on religious crises. The night before, people were sleeping in their beds, having no clue what this day had in store for them. And some got lucky. Some could only hear the sound of the massive tornado as it began to move and leave its trail of destruction. They heard the roar. People miles away could hear it. They could hear the sounds of massive trees being completely uprooted and torn out of the ground and thrown crashing back to the ground as the wind roared all the while. The tornado stripped the forest from both shores of the Mississippi River as it tracked more or less along the river's path. This description gives us a vivid mental image of the size of this thing. Imagine a massive tornado essentially straddling the river. That's scary. 269 people died on the river that day when the tornado threw, tore apart, or sank people's flatboats. Others that were in the river port of Natchez Landing were thrown into the river by the tornado. Their occupants also drowned. The tornado continued to tear a path as it followed the river. The tornado caught many who were doing business on shore off guard, and Several lost their lives here as it destroyed the port, dwellings, more steamboats and flatboats, almost leaving nothing behind intact at all. It finally crossed the river and landed on the eastern shore, more or less at the exact spot where the US 84 US 428 bridge is today. The fact people could not see it definitely leads me to think it was rain-wrapped, concealed behind the wind and the reported sheets of rain. People taking shelter from what they might have thought just a strong storm had no idea and no way to see what was bearing down on them. If they had any idea, maybe some really noticed the wind increasing or heard that roar that you swear vibrates your very bones, it probably would have been too late to get anywhere that offered shelter unless they were already in a building that had something. Because the tornado now moved into Natchez itself. The area around Natchez saw a huge loss of life, especially on the river. Many boats had anchored in Natchez to avoid a recent tax on a nearby port, so they and their crew and owners were now in the tornado's path. The steamers Hines and Prairie were both sunk. 116 flatboats docked at Natchez were sunk or just completely destroyed. The town of Natchez itself was, to put it mildly, completely obliterated. The damage in Natchez was compared to all the cannons of the Battle of the Three Emperors during the War of the Third Coalition, itself only part of the larger Napoleonic Wars. 12 city blocks were leveled. Buildings destroyed included the town's theater, 2 churches, the main square, homes, and multiple hotels. The dinner bells in the large hotels had rung a little before 2 o'clock, and the most of our citizens were sitting at their tables when suddenly the atmosphere was darkened, so as to require the lighting of candles. In another moment, the tornado, in all its wrath, was upon us. The strongest buildings shook as if tossed with an earthquake. The air was black with whirling eddies of house walls, roofs, chimneys, huge timbers torn from distant ruins, all shot through the air as if thrown by a mighty catapult. Was how the May 8th issue of the Mississippi Daily Free Trader described the tornado. Very scary, especially considering how little we as a species really knew about tornadoes at this time in our history. I talked about a tornado from the 1500s before, and I'm sure by the 1800s we knew a little bit more about them, but we still didn't know nearly as much about them as we do today, and a lot of people would have had no way to get advanced warning that one was even coming, something that we definitely take for granted today. Back in those days, oftentimes, dare I say, you wouldn't know a tornado was coming until you looked out your window and saw it about to hit you, if you even got that lucky. Again, there was no NOAA, there was no National Weather Service, there were no satellites to monitor the weather with, and the most people might have gotten to indicate a tornado was coming was some instinctual pinprick telling them something was wrong. That little voice in your gut being like, hey, something isn't right here. I'm not trying to add any kind of levity to this. I'm just trying to really hammer home the point that that really was all that people may have had to warn them that something like this was coming. And that is so freaking scary. That is so freaking scary. That little chuckle I had there was not me laughing at this situation, and don't think that's what I was doing. That was just straight up my actual reaction to just having that sink in and hit me. It was just like, man. You know, I couldn't find many witness descriptions of the tornado itself, unless that description I just read counts. I don't know if that author actually saw the tornado, though. I don't know if whoever wrote that was actually there, so I just wonder what it looked like. A violent rope? A huge wedge? Completely hidden behind a wall of rain and no one even saw it? Maybe a mix of all of them at various points of its life? Was there a dead man walking? Did it seem to move and slither around like the Wizard of Oz tornado? Which tornadoes can move like that, yes, and it's terrifying. So many questions about it. I didn't even see any illustrations of it drawn at the time. The ones I've been showing on screen are older or from the same general era, but not of the actual Natchez tornado itself. One account I read describing the damage indicated the tornado might have been anywhere from 1 to 2 miles wide at one point. Again, I read this stuff and it's just like, man, we really take advanced warning systems that we have today for granted. I think I don't think we can truly appreciate how it was to have something like this hit you with no possible way to know it was coming. Now, as if the damage to the city wasn't bad enough, with around 48 dead here and the loss of life by the hundreds on the river horrific enough, it was far from over. Hundreds more were still going to die. After carving through the city like a red-hot knife through already warm butter, the tornado ripped across the countryside and tore apart multiple plantations. Reportedly, hundreds, most of them slaves, were killed in this area, but no accurate count was ever done. It also should be noted that the exact count of the dead on the river was never fully achieved either. But even with that inaccurate and incomplete count of the dead, those that were counted alone puts this tornado as the second deadliest in United States history today. The Free Trader added, "There is no telling how spread has been the ruin. Reports have come in from plantations 20 miles distant in Louisiana, and the rage of the tempest was terrible. Hundreds of slaves killed, dwellings swept like chaff from their foundations, the forest uprooted, and the crops beaten down and destroyed. Never, never, never was there such desolation and ruin." These reports came from the ruins of Concordia Parish. In Senate document number 199 in the Journal of the Joint Commission, dated May 26, 1840, the following was written. "We crossed today the path of a recent tornado, which had prostrated trees and cane on the riverbanks. Its course was observed to be from south 72 degrees west to north 72 degrees east, and the track had to be from 300 to 400 yards to 70 to 370 meters wide. This was supposed to be the same tornado which occasioned such dreadful destruction of human lives and houses in Natchez on the 7th of May. Today, the damage this tornado left would have totaled $21 million. This tornado, the damage it left, has even been compared to what you'd expect to see left behind by the impossible F6. You know, sometimes stories like this remind us that real life can be just as horrific and extreme as even the most over-the-top tornado movies sometimes tend to get. Like, I love Twister. I made a joke about it earlier. I like Into the Storm. Twisters was fun. The Tornado in the Wizard of Oz is still probably the scariest one ever put to film. But you add something like this tornado to a movie and you probably get called out for being over the top. And I say this in the most respectful way I can to the event, those who were affected, and especially those who were killed by it. It's just humbling to know that tornadoes can be just as destructive as imagination sometimes makes them in movies. And it's good to remember because it helps put some things in perspective. They should be respected as having that potential. Tornadoes are one way that we can be humbled, sometimes in the most horrific ways. And all you have to do to understand that is to read these stories or look at pictures of, say, Joplin after the 2011 tornado. With the sheer destruction and sheer number of dead, I'm surprised that this, the second deadliest tornado in U.S. history, isn't more widely remembered. I know that there were just, more long-term important things happening in the United States in 1840. We were rapidly just careening towards the Civil War. But the tri-state tornado was only 85 years later. For context, the sinking of the Titanic and the release of James Cameron's movie was only 85 years apart. Really puts it in perspective. It wasn't that long apart, or even as far as human memory goes, not that long ago at all. There is a chance there could have been someone who witnessed both the two deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history in their lifetime. I'm just surprised is all that this isn't more widely talked about. Tell me what you think of this tornado and the others that I've talked about this year. I'll link my tornado documentary playlist at the top of the description if this is your first of mine and you want to see the others. Also, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see others like this, then give the video a like. It tells me that you did and that these are the kinds of videos you want to see more of, and it also helps me grow. Now, early next year, I'll be covering the only deadly U.S. tornado to beat this one. For the 100th anniversary, which seems crazy to think about, I'll be talking about the infamous tri-state tornado of 1925, so stay around for that. In the meantime, the next tornado video I will do will be about the 1953 Flint Beecher F5 tornado. Another super rough one. I already have the script for it written. Just, man, is all I could think after I finished researching it and writing it. Some of the accounts of the Flint Beecher F5 were some of just the most heartbreaking and visceral I have ever read for a tornado. So it's been on my list for over 6 months now, so it's good that it's finally getting moved along, and it's going to be out Christmas Day, and it'll be my last documentary of the year. And then the topics I plan to cover in January will be, well, first, the deadliest tornado in all of world history. And then after that, I'll be talking about the San Zebeku brown bear incident, something completely new for me that I've seen some talk about over here, but it doesn't get much attention. So I'm gonna talk about that, and then I'll be talking about the 1918, excuse me, sinking of the SS Justica, and that'll be my first shipwreck video of 2025. So I've got a bit of a diverse amount of videos coming, so stay tuned for those. And more Twister videos coming down the line after them too, Tri-State Tornado included, of course. Just being the end of the year, I felt like it was a good chance to just talk about what I've got planned for next month and the start of next year, and also want to open the floor to you all. Tell me what you want to see in 2025. Thank you for watching.